Hello and welcome to Just a Dog podcast. I'm your host Nadine. If you asked me what kind of person I believe I am, I would say I'm a good, honest and kind person. And I would estimate that you'd likely say the same if I asked you what kind of person you believe that you are. But sometimes, without even knowing it, we literally fund and fuel the most cruel and barbaric systems that affect animals and the environment and even people around the world. From tourism to the products that we purchase to the food that we consume, we fuel the system often without realizing it. I recently recorded an episode with Abigail Forsyth. Abigail is the campaign manager for PETA Asia, working to end animal exploitation by leading campaigns to protect animals and inspire compassionate action. Abigail mentioned that almost every system that uses animals is designed so that we don't see what's actually happening. The packaging is clean, the marketing is clever, and everything looks fine. And because it looks fine, we don't ask questions. And because we don't ask questions, nothing changes. In this episode, we talked about the dog meat trade and what's behind the ban in South Korea. We talked about what's really going on in shelters and puppy mills. And we also talked about the dog leather industry, something that I had no idea even existed. We talked about how things that used to be completely normal, like riding elephants or going to the circus or even greyhound racing, are now things that people would be embarrassed to admit that they did. And what that tells us about how quickly perceptions can shift when people are given the information. This episode wasn't recorded to shame anyone or to make you feel bad for choices that you have made. The aim is simply to plant a seed of awareness, and that is it. So if you learn something new, please share this episode with a friend and be the person that plants the seed for them. Let's begin. Hello. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too.
Where are you dialing in from at the moment?
So I'm currently in Thailand. I came here 12 years ago as a teacher and worked in a British international school for like 8 years. And then I've been working for PETA for the last 4 years.
Wow, that's quite the transition. So going from a teacher to working for PETA, what was the catalyst for you?
I think I had been teaching at that point for 10 years. And although the two jobs seem completely different and unrelated, I think there are kind of some similarities of having compassion for children are vulnerable, animals are vulnerable. They both need our protection and looking after. I love working with children, but I also love working with animals. Yeah, so I think some of the skills maybe overlap a little bit. And, they're both just, jobs where you really just need to show compassion on a daily basis. I believe teaching is very meaningful. And working in animal protection to me is just as meaningful. So I was based in Thailand at the time and just started volunteering for PETA Asia during my spare time from teaching. I was vegan already, so had always cared about animals from a young age. And then once I'd gone vegan, everything just kind of fell into place in my mind of how animals should be treated and how we should be not even necessarily working to protect them, but just not causing them any harm and suffering. And it's the very least that we can all do. And then eventually took a full-time job and moved away from teaching. And here I am.
Yeah. Any regrets?
No, I'm very happy in the position that I'm in. And I love that I can contribute in any way possible to helping animals and to ending animal suffering. And, this work is really needed everywhere in the world. But, of course, Asia is a huge region. So there's a lot of work to be done. And it's great. It's a privilege to be part of that.
What does your day-to-day look like?
So I'm the campaign manager at PETA Asia. So our days can vary a lot, which is great. It's continues to be exciting and there's always new things to do, new things to plan. And PETA is committed to establishing and protecting the rights of all animals. So we to encourage companies to enact policies that better protect animals. We work to persuade governments to improve legislation to reduce suffering. And we also work with celebrities or influencers, and we try and get the message to the most people as possible. So we also organize street campaigns and try to get support that way. So we have campaigns that we are working on a daily basis, and these campaigns can go on for weeks or years, or some of them will be unfortunately indefinite. But then we also have things that crop up, reports of abuse that we would then deal with immediately, things that are happening in the news or something new issue that is affecting animals. For example, just last week in Thailand, a huge number, it was over 70 tigers died at a facility in northern Thailand. So that's something that we didn't plan for the previous day, but suddenly comes up, that we would then try to insert our opinion in that story and help the public to understand the consequences of their actions when it comes to animals, and the things they choose to spend their money on, or the places they choose to visit, especially when they're on holiday, and how that can affect animals' lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking last night, actually, knowing that I was going to speak to you and that you were calling in from Asia, I was thinking about my trip to Bali. I've been there a couple of times, and just thinking about luwak coffee,
Mm.
and and remembering going to try the coffee and seeing the luwak in the cage and feeling a bit uncomfortable with that. And people kept reassuring us it's not from, it's all ethical. But when you're like, when someone tells you something, but what you see is contradicting that,
Yeah.
how do you think, or why do you think, I guess, humans have that disconnect, I guess. I think it's cognitive dissonance. Why, in your experience, from what you've observed, do we tend to disconnect what is ethical and with what is comfortable?
I think a lot of the time, the realities behind any of these industries are hidden to us in general as consumers or as tourists. As consumers, we're faced with packaging that makes any product look neat and tidy, and you have happy animals on the front of the product, and you're hidden from what actually happened to an animal prior to you being able to purchase that product. And the same across all industries, even with pet shops. Again, you're faced with the cute baby animals. You don't see the breeding factories that are going on behind the scenes. And the tourist industry, I think people have just gotten so used to seeing animals in cages. Children are taken to zoos as a activity in the school holidays. It's so normalized that we don't actually stop to think that, when you go to the zoo, that's one fun day of your holiday, but for an animal, that's their entire life. And yeah, again, as you mentioned with the Kopi Luwak, so many tourists are taken to these facilities without even expecting it. It's not something they ask for. It's not
No.
something they're hoping to see on their trip to Bali, but drivers just take them there as part of a tour, and then people can almost feel awkward to say they don't want to be there, or because you're suddenly there and it's unexpected and you're a bit surprised and shocked. And yeah, then, people will always just tell us what they think we want to hear, and we would often believe it just to protect ourselves. I think, we don't want to ever think of ourselves as contributing to animal abuse and animal suffering. So we try to take ourselves out of the equation, put the blame elsewhere, or tell ourselves that it's not what we can clearly see it is. So yeah, I think a lot of that is self-preservation. People don't want to admit to doing something wrong. They don't want to change what they're doing, and also clever marketing tactics to hide the truth and the reality of a lot of industries around the world where animals are suffering.
Yeah. The thing that I struggle with is that obviously a lot of us, like, we don't know everything about everything. And so I guess awareness is really important in understanding the many ways in which human decisions affect or exploit animals, whether it's upstream, downstream, 50 touch points away. And then when it comes to things like veganism or doing things correctly or right or whatever, all of those things are really important, but it almost feels like a mammoth task because there are things that you're aware of and there are things that you're not aware of that you're aware of, and there's things that you're not even aware of that you're not even aware of. So somewhere along the line, you're going to be impacting animals anyway. How do you kind of consolidate with that in your, not just veganism, but in the work that you do to try and do as much good and positive in the world without overwhelming yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that almost every issue that animals face in the world are caused by humans. So that also means that humans can help every issue that animals are facing in the world. And, of course, we all can't fix everything. And, it is overwhelming when you stop to think how animals are suffering in just so many different ways in so many different places. But as I mentioned before, you don't have to work in animal protection. You don't even have to be an animal person. You just have to look at the ways that you are maybe contributing to animal suffering and to reduce or eliminate those. For me, working in animal protection, it helps me. I know that there's so much suffering going on in the world, but trying to do something about it is how I can, kind of live in a world that can be so cruel, by just knowing that hopefully I'm having even a little bit of difference for animals.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think after my dad passed away, it got me thinking a lot about things like legacy. And so I was thinking, what could I sustainably do for the rest of my life and make a positive impact on the world? And it was just a no-brainer for me. Focus on dogs. They bring me the most joy, but also conversely, the most, I guess, sadness
Yeah.
in terms of how the world treats them and how, I guess, the lack of awareness. So yeah, what do you hope your legacy would be in the world?
Yeah, I hope that people who know me will know my compassion for animals and my passion and drive to try and reduce their suffering and to improve animals' lives. And whether or not I will make huge impacts, let's see, but I will certainly work every day to try. And even if you can just help, um, a few animals, that make such a difference to their lives, and that's huge. And if we could all have a little impact on the world in any way possible, then yeah, together we can all have real meaningful change.
What I'm curious about is the kind of Western approach or the Western awareness of what people would consider to be unethical, which might be considered normal, or considered just a way of living. Or how do you consolidate that or approach that, especially when you go out to talk to people and try and affect change?
Yeah, certainly. And this isn't about judging cultures. It's just about recognizing suffering wherever that may be. And in different countries, suffering will be perceived possible for different animals. In the UK, people love cats and dogs and the animals that are considered as pets and part of the family. And in other cultures, some of those animals would be eaten and turned into leather. But the suffering is the same. In the UK, people are still eating animals, turning animals into leather. It's just different animals. So it's difficult because there are different perceptions about which animals are important and which animals are for us to use or to consume. Of course, PETA considers every single species and every single animal as important as each other. But culturally, people have very different ideas about that in different countries. And, for example, one example in Asia, obviously elephant riding is very popular. And as a Western person in Asia, when I start to speak about why we shouldn't ride elephants, people will say, okay, but in your culture, people ride horses. And so, there's this difference in perception of which animals we can use for certain things and which animals we can't. That varies from country to country. And, my opinion will always be, it doesn't matter what country we're in, what culture we're in, suffering of animals is never acceptable. And tradition and culture are not excuses for animal abuse. So yeah, it can be difficult. And you have to approach things differently in different places. At the end of the day, every single country is responsible for causing suffering or harm to some species of animals. That is very, worldwide and widespread. It's just the species that are suffering can vary from country to country, but the suffering and abuse is the same.
Yeah. What about things like speciesism? Did I say that correctly? Speciesism. I think there are a lot of people who take the approach of it just is what it is. It's almost like animals are just not necessary collateral because humans are more important, like duh. In marketing campaigns, like the reason I reached out to you was because I received an email and I was shocked to my core about something I wasn't aware of in the dog world. But when it comes to affecting change, how effective are PETA campaigns? And secondly, what are some of the ways that you've seen that have been effective in getting people to change their behavior or perception of suffering in the world?
Yeah, so I think certainly the use of animals has become so normalized in almost every culture that it's, very difficult to undo those perceptions and those ideas that people have grown up with. The use of animals is so ingrained in all traditions and cultures, and you're talking family meals and things from your childhood that are nostalgic, and so then trying to undo decades of what people have been taught to be just normal or even the right thing is a huge task. And obviously it's extremely difficult, or we would have changed everyone's mind by now. And so it's a huge task that we're faced with to completely undo what society has told everybody for generations and generations. So it's difficult. And yes, one of the ways that we try to get our message across is with just delivering the truth. It is shocking, but that's just simply how it is. The email you're referring to about the dog leather industry, most people would be rightly horrified to find out that dogs are killed for leather. And PETA Asia did this investigation in certain regions in China, and we found that these slaughterhouses are processing hundreds of dogs a day. They are bludgeoning them, cutting their throats, skinning them. And this is in a country that has almost no regulations, transparency. And these dog skins, the dog leather, are then making their way onto the worldwide market without the correct labeling. That means that any leather that you could be buying in any other country could be made from dog leather. And that should shock people. But at the same time, the same cruel process is happening to cows, even pigs and sheep in some cultures. And people should also be equally horrified to learn that other animals are being turned into handbags and belts, just completely unnecessarily and pointless commodities. And the safest way to make sure that you're not contributing to any of that, whether it's dogs, cows, pigs, is to not buy any products derived from animal materials. So yeah, things like that, they do shock people, but they're not embellished. It's simply the truth about what's happening out there. And yeah, everybody's different, but certainly for a lot of people that works. They see something that shocks them into realizing that they are contributing for that. And for other people, it's the opposite. They just completely turn away because they don't want to know, or they don't want to see something that makes them feel so uncomfortable, and they'll just scroll past. Or because that's where we're seeing most things now, is online, it's on our phones, it's on social media. So it's great that this information now is getting to people, but it's also so easy to just scroll by and carry on doing what you're doing, because it's such a hard reality to face. And so yeah, we have different approaches because people react differently to different materials. So not everything we share is shocking or gruesome, but some of it is. And we try to show the same thing in many different ways, basically, so that it can appeal to different types of people. And yeah, I think eventually people just see something that does make them think. I grew up vegetarian and maybe knew more about the kind of dairy and egg industry, but didn't want to think about it. And I'm sure I had been faced with the realities many times, but then there was just one particular video I saw on social media that wasn't gruesome, wasn't shocking at all. It was just very thought provoking. And for me, that was it. I'd probably seen 100 things before, but it took that one video, and that was what I needed to really reassess what I was doing and to align my actions with my values.
I love that. Values are so important. Is that what you use as a guiding compass for all the decisions that you make? Does it feel like a kind of cut and dry way of living or moving through the world for
Yeah,
you?
I think absolutely. I think I've always known what I value and what I consider to be right and wrong for many years. Tried to ignore that to be able to do what I wanted to do. And as soon as I had that kind of light bulb moment and really looked at how my actions didn't align with what I knew to be right and wrong, there was really just no turning back. And now it just feels much better to be living a life that that I actually agree with, and that does completely align with my idea of what's right and wrong.
That's wonderful. A lot of people don't know what their values are. It's not like you're a child and then, someone sits you down and says, all right, we're going to talk about values. What do you value? And here are your options. Pick five.
Yeah.
So, as adults, a lot of us just kind of move through the world oblivious to what we actually care about and how we can align those things that we care about with our daily actions and choices that we make. In your opinion, is there any way that humans could continue to use animal products in a humane or ethical way?
No, personally, I don't think so. I think in any industry across the world, as soon as you introduce profit to a situation, animal welfare is the first thing to go. Businesses function on profit. If you're trying to sell a product to people, things have to be done as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible. Animals will always suffer any time that they're used, any time that they are seen as a commodity, because that's what industries that use animals, they use them as commodities. They're profit driving machines, and there's just no way to use an animal for our own benefit and still be ethical in doing so. Yeah.
I agree. Dogs. Let's talk about dogs. So, dog leather. Those are two words that I would never in a million years have put together. That's just the most bizarre thing. And as soon as you kind of said that, a lot of people wouldn't realize that some of the leather products that they might own could be dog. Yeah, that's horrible. I have leather products, and I'm sitting here thinking I wouldn't be able to tell the difference at all. And I shouldn't even be asking the question, is it okay? Oh, it's cow, so that's fine. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
such a mind,
Yeah.
yeah, there's just a conundrum trying to unpick and unravel all of these different things that I potentially have grown up to think are okay. I'm originally from South Africa. Meat,
Yeah.
animal products are everywhere from our forefathers and the way that people survived on the land. Like, it is just so innate and so part of being, I guess, a human to consume animal products. But then having that cognitive dissonance, you've got another animal in your home and you treat them almost like a child. I've got my Duna, my Galga, sleeping on my sofa at the moment with her giant fluffy bed. And we've just come home from a walk and she's well fed and she's got an amazing life. But yeah, it's so bizarre how, and yet I can still eat animal products. So anyways, that's a journey of personal development that I'm personally going through. Talking about dogs, what are some of the challenges or campaigns that PETA's currently working on in addition to the dog leather, raising awareness about that?
Yes, so I think one of the big ones, and this is an issue all across the world at the moment, is overpopulation of dogs. And as you say, you came to Thailand and you saw dogs on the street, and you're very much faced with the overpopulation dog crisis in a lot of parts of Asia. But that also doesn't mean that it's not happening elsewhere. The UK, I think, has over 100,000 dogs in shelters. So these animals aren't on the streets, they're behind closed doors, but they're still suffering because they shouldn't be spending their lives in cages in shelters. We've bred those dogs into existence and then just abandoned them. And many of them will spend their whole lives in shelters because there simply aren't enough homes for them. And that's because we are continually breeding dogs. Dogs are treated as breeding machines in puppy mills around the world. They are denied comfort and veterinary care. The dogs who are used for breeding spend their whole lives in these facilities, just churning out litter after litter. The babies are taken away from them far too soon because everybody wants a cute baby dog. They are the ones who sell. They're the ones who make the best profit. And so, when you adopt an animal, you're not just saving one dog, you're also reducing that market for puppy breeders that treat animals as inventory. And in the last couple of years, PETA Asia has investigated puppy mills in South Korea, Indonesia, and Vietnam. We found dogs left to endure disease, injury, neglect, also their babies can be sold for profit. Dogs are bred in almost every country in the world, and even in places like the UK where regulations will be stricter, that doesn't change the fact that there are 100,000 dogs without a home. And if you're in a position to care for a dog and to welcome a dog into your family, why would you consider buying one when there are so many who are in desperate need of a home and of love and care? And shelters are so overrun, and so there's such a huge number of dogs in need of homes that there are dogs of every type of breed. Because people will also say, okay, but I want this type of dog and I need a dog that's safe around children and I need a dog. The good news is the shelters have every single type of dog, every temperament, every size. There's really no excuse to be paying for more and more dogs to be churned out, many of who then are abandoned either onto the streets or into shelters. So another big thing is spay and neuter, and that's one of the most compassionate choices that a guardian can make, because this really prevents suffering before it happens. So laws should be introduced to make desexing of dogs and cats compulsory. This would have such a huge impact on the population of homeless animals. And I would just really urge people to consider the lifelong commitment that having a dog is. It's not just about what's convenient right now and what you would like right now for you and your current situation. You really have to think about the next 10 years, 15 years, maybe 20 years. Having an animal is a huge commitment, and they're not just temporary for you to just throw out on the streets or hand into a shelter when your situation changes or when you're just no longer interested in having a dog. And the fact that pet shops exist so readily and easily, that just really gives people the opportunity to just go out and buy a dog on a whim, just something that you've just suddenly thought about. Oh, wouldn't it be really cute to get a puppy? And 10 minutes later you can literally go out and get one without really thinking about the time commitment, the cost. Anybody that has a dog will know that veterinary costs can pile up. These things really need to be considered in advance. And if you do have the means to take a dog into your home, the financial means, the space, the time, then we would ask everybody to consider adopting one from a reputable shelter, because there are many just waiting to be loved.
Absolutely. Last week, Tuesday, went to the State of UK Rescue gathering at the Houses of Parliament in London, where a lot of people from rescues or shelters around the country come together. And give a briefing or a snapshot of what the situation is looking like. It's not looking good at the moment at all. There's definitely not a balancing, and very healthy dogs are being killed because there's no space. It's just really, really dire. Meanwhile, 80% of the world's dogs are wild dogs. It just seems that like Asia has more wild dogs than here, but actually ours are just behind cages.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
You're confronted with it much more here because they're living on the streets, and in other societies like the UK, if an animal is found on the street, then they're promptly taken to a shelter. But that doesn't mean that they're going to have a better life necessarily. They could spend years and years in a cage at the shelter waiting to be adopted. And meanwhile, people are going out and buying dogs instead. And yeah, I think if you do adopt from a reputable shelter, you know that they would have had their vaccines, they've been desexed. You'll have information on their behavioral needs. And when things are done correctly, you can actually have far more of a better picture of the dog that you're bringing into your home than just, buying a little puppy that's probably been taken away from their mum far too early and will have all sorts of behavioral issues because of the beginning that they've had to their life. So I think, these things are a lot of the time excuses that people tell themselves because they, at the end of the day, they want a little baby dog, that they want this type of dog. So, you hear all these excuses of, oh, I need a dog that's, for allergies or for being suitable around children. And again, these are just excuses because there is every type of dog just ready to be adopted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a friend who works in rescue and, she sends me pictures of some of the kind of dogs that come in. There are so many puppies, so
Yeah.
many puppies. Just this weekend, she sent me a video clip of a dog. It's completely emaciated adult dog who was pregnant and had
Mm.
her puppies in the shelter. Yeah, and it's just all sorts of breeds,
Yeah.
all sorts of ages. Like you can literally go into any shelter at this moment in time and literally pick from just about whatever you can find from a breeder's directly. So it makes no sense that anyone would go out and buy dogs in this day and age. It really, really doesn't. It really fuels a very, very dark system that is just horrendously cruel. What other challenges are dogs facing? If you look through a dog-centered lens, what else is going on in the world?
Something that would surprise a lot of people is that dogs are still being used in laboratories around the world for animal testing. And this is very hidden from public view. It's not something that anybody is ever confronted with or gets to witness or experience. But that doesn't make the suffering any less real. In the UK, thousands of dogs are still bred every year for animal testing. And
Yeah.
modern non-animal methods are increasingly available, and companies, governments, everybody should be doing everything they can to be completely moving away from any and all animal testing. And while these breeding facilities for the laboratory medical pharma industries are still existing, money is being spent in continuing this industry when money could be spent in looking into new methods which already exist. We should really be completely moving away from the testing of any animals. But I think people are surprised to know that dogs are still used. I think when people think of animals in laboratory, they're thinking of rats and
Rats.
mice. And yet these are the animals that are more commonly used. And that means that these species are suffering more. They're using hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of those animals. And dogs are used on a smaller scale, but we're still seeing, in reality, it's still huge numbers,
Mm.
thousands of dogs in the
Well, one
UK.
is too many.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
one is too many. And they're beagles at the end of the day. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter what breed they are, but like the most docile,
yeah,
conforming, gentle dogs are just being bred, and completely
yeah.
agree with you. Completely
And they're
agree. It's awful.
subjected to such invasive tests and involving toxic chemicals and, or smoke inhalation and, they're just kept confined in cages and then dragged out for these awful tests and experiments and painful procedures until they're ultimately killed or die in any of these tests.
Yeah.
It's tragic that animals are still being used in those ways, especially when other methods now are so widely available. And, a lot of these tests on animals are completely pointless and they don't even give meaningful data because they are testing on animals and we are humans. And a lot of these things cannot be translated from one species to another. Even in some countries, new products come out and they have to be tested again, even though they're still using, the same materials that other products have been using for decades. These tests have already been administered, and yet it's just a hoop that companies have to jump through to be signed off as safe, when it's just completely unnecessary now. And government should be looking at how we can just completely end all animal testing. It's just simply not needed. And there are many other methods available, non-animal methods, that will actually give accurate results that can be used for humans. A lot of products now on the back will have the symbol, the leaping bunny, or they might be PETA approved or Vegan Society approved. In the UK, it's very easy to find which products have not been tested on animals. In Asia, it can be very difficult because in some countries, animal testing is required, even for some European or British brands. If they then sell their product to China, for example, they will then still have to test their product on animals. So then the company is suddenly not as ethical as it is in one country as it is in another. So PETA approved brands that do not sell to any countries where animal testing is compulsory. So only companies that don't participate in animal testing whatsoever at any point in their line.
Wow, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a minefield of, you find a company that doesn't test on animals for the products they sell in the country you're in, but then you find out maybe they do elsewhere. But more and more companies now are ending tests on animals, and consumers are demanding better. They're demanding change, and that makes a huge impact on these industries that rely on customers and rely on customers buying their product. So as consumers, as tourists, we can really have an impact by choosing what we spend our money on, what companies we choose to support. And when people demand change, people listen. Companies listen, governments listen. We just need enough people to speak up about things. But as consumers, we hold the power. And when we stop buying things that harm animals or visiting places that rely on animal suffering, then we can see meaningful change.
I think it was South Korea that started phasing out dog farms for meat, for the meat trade. What is the situation at the moment, as far as you're aware, in terms of kind of what's happening in terms of changing perceptions around eating dogs?
Yes, I think perceptions have definitely changed a lot around dogs in general, which of course has changed people to reconsider eating them. And in many countries now, and, for example, South Korea, a country that traditionally ate dogs in the same way that other cultures eat cows and pigs and chickens. It was just a normal part of society. But countries like this now have dogs as, part of their families. In so many countries now, birth rates are declining and people have stopped having children, and they now are having dogs and cats, and, these animals that are being treated as their babies. And, we're seeing such a growth in that kind of pet industry in Asia, which of course has then led people to reconsider the animals that they're eating, because it's, culturally, people usually don't have the animals they eat in the home as part of their family. So those two concepts definitely have led to positive change in countries like South Korea. They've recently taken meaningful steps to shut down farms and to enact this ban that will come into place where the killing and consumption of dogs for food will be illegal. So that's huge progress. Of course, dogs killed for meat endure unimaginable suffering. Slaughterhouses and the farms, they face brutal deaths and turned into somebody's meal. So it's great to see that progress happening. It's great to see people considering dogs as the living, feeling individuals that they are. I hope that will continue to translate to other species as well. But it's certainly a great step in the right direction.
It is, yeah. What other countries typically or historically used to participate in the meat trade, in the dog meat trade? Is it Vietnam?
Yeah, so traditionally Vietnam, Indonesia, China, dogs will still be killed for meat. So definitely the new generations in all countries in Asia have a complete different perception of dogs. They now consider dogs to be an animal that you would have in your home. Dog consumption is definitely decreasing everywhere. Of course, this may also lead to the increased killing of other species because people are not going to start eating less. They're just going to start eating different. So we hope that will be plant-based, but of course, a lot of countries will be swapping one animal for another.
Gosh, how do you remain hopeful?
I think, across the world, we can see that people are starting to change their perceptions of animals, of all animals, and what is okay and what is right. And a lot of things that used to be considered normal are now being questioned. You could speak to anyone and they would be against animal testing. And yet this is something that we've done for so many years and was once just such a normal part of the medical industry or the cosmetics industry, the pharma industry. And that's a huge change in public perception. And we're seeing that across a lot of industries. You mentioned dog racing earlier, which used to be a lot bigger than it is now. It's again shunned in a lot of societies and just isn't something that's popular anymore. So I think more and more attitudes towards animals are evolving, changing, and consumers and tourists, they are demanding better. A decade ago, it was so common to see, people coming to countries in Asia and then posting pictures of them riding an elephant, and you just don't see people doing that anymore. I think, people would now just be shunned for posting something like that. It's just changed so much of things that used to be, something that people wanted to do. People would travel to the other side of the world to get this photo.
Yeah.
An elephant
Camel
or
riding.
a tiger. Yeah. And now I think a lot of people would be embarrassed to say they did that 10 years ago because public perception has changed so much in so many areas. Things like circuses, would have been completely normal, maybe in the UK for my parents' generation or grandparents to go and see these wild animals being used in circuses. And now that would be completely in places like the UK. So things are definitely changing, and that gives me hope that things will continue to change and that other industries will also continue to change.
Fingers and toes crossed. So what are some campaigns that you know of that PETA have succeeded in?
Yes, we certainly have, victories often in different campaigns. Just a few weeks ago, maybe longer, or last month or the month before, we celebrated Indonesia putting a complete ban on elephant rides across the entire country, which is huge and, something that, maybe we couldn't have imagined happening a few years ago. So again, that just really shows that when people demand change, that governments and companies do listen. And you mentioned camel riding just now. So in Egypt, we have a campaign against the use of horses and camels at the pyramids, where they're treated terribly. They are forced to work all day long in the unbearable heat. They are whipped forced to just continue when they can no longer walk, when they're so exhausted. And yeah, we've managed to persuade dozens of companies across the world to remove camel and horse rides from their Egyptian pyramids itineraries. So we certainly see a lot of changes within companies and governments when people demand action and when people no longer want to pay for these activities. That really drives real change. And so yeah, we continue to see victories across all our campaigns, but yeah, a lot of campaigns will be something that we work on for years and years, but every company that pulls their support of something makes a huge difference and has a big knock-on effect also for other companies.
So ultimately, what is the kind of tipping point for that change to happen? So it starts with awareness and then volume, so getting the masses interested in advocating for change, and then going to government and getting government to introduce new laws or regulations, and then change happens. Is that the trajectory?
Yeah, so certainly first we would need to expose whatever cruelty is happening. So, for example, a couple of years ago, PETA Asia investigated duck farms in Vietnam where they kill the ducks for their feathers, which are then used in down products. So we investigated this cruelty and exposed this cruelty, and then we went to H&M, who were one of the companies that buy the feathers for their down products from these slaughterhouses in Vietnam. And we showed them where their products are coming from, and we showed their customers where their products are coming from. Customers demand change, and companies have to listen when they're faced with the truth of what they're doing. And when their customers are told the truth of what they're doing, then companies pay attention because, again, they run because consumers fund them. So they need consumers on their side. And yeah, when enough people speak up, then that's when change happens.
I love that. So, considering all of the different campaigns that PETA works on, not just dog related, but a whole host of other issues around the world, and all of the things that you're exposed to perhaps on a daily basis, the gruesome realities, how do you personally keep your edges soft?
Interesting question. I'm not sure. I think it's definitely something you get used to more and more, but certainly it's not work for everyone. But I also don't believe you need to be a PETA campaigner to make a difference. There's different roles suited to different people, and you don't even have to work in animal protection to make a difference. Choosing to support humane practices, refusing to fund cruelty, anybody can have can make a difference. And yes, in my job, I'm very much faced with the gruesome realities of what's going on in the world. And, that's just something that I'm driven to do. But anybody can make a difference, big or small, in their local area or in their own home, the choices they're making, the products they're buying. And yeah, for me personally, I continue to also work hands-on with animals myself, so that I'm not just faced with these kind of huge global tasks that are, so mammoth that they, can feel very overwhelming. But I also rescue rodents specifically. So each individual animal that I rescue and save and rehabilitate and rewild is such a huge success, that it doesn't have to be huge global change. It doesn't have to be changing governments' minds and corporate minds. We can all have our own little differences in the world. Yeah, I think that's what kind of keeps me more positive, is also by doing the kind of small work that I do in my spare time, and that I can see the kind of measurable difference, the impact that I'm having on a daily basis.
So that keeps you going. What helps regulate your nervous system?
Probably my cat. Am I allowed to say that I'm a cat person on a dog
You
podcast?
absolutely are. You're an animal person, so you're welcome.
But yeah, I have a rescue cat who lives with me, and I think sometimes when I'm faced at work with some very awful things, then just being able to come home to my own space and my own little rescue, makes things feel more manageable.
That's amazing. They have the most incredible power to just kind of calm us down, right? My dog sleeps on my bed with me. Yeah, yesterday she jumped on my bed and she was just moaning and she couldn't get close enough to me. And I just thought, oh
Yeah.
my God, this is literally has been my dream for my entire life. And they just bring us so much joy. Who could be stressed with a dog or even a cat around, right? Anyway, I am so grateful for your time, Abby. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for everything that you do for animals and also for humans.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Abby. Bye. Bye.